All right, Chairman. It's
Hello.
great to see everybody back. It's been a crazy week for me, as you know, and I appreciated Brian the shout out on social media celebrating the arrival of the baby, and yeah, my wife and I just had our very first son. His name's Oakley, like the sunglasses. We were going to name him Ray-Ban, but we kind of thought that was too on the nose. Yeah, it's going good so far. I'm a little sleepy, but you know, I still feel if you're watching this on YouTube, you can I still have all the color in my face, and things are going good. But yeah, I really wanted this week to talk about something that I think comes up pretty frequently in a lot of the conversations that I have, in particular on YouTube and social media. And I can see from a degree that this is something that we all sort of get asked about, for people who are specifically maybe more DIY inclined and maybe aren't the type of people that are going to hire services from us, but really want to sort of take some of the skills and best practices and materials that we use and implement that into their own pedal boards. And so I really wanted to talk today, with your blessing, to sort of go through maybe some of the materials that we like to use, from, you know, the zip ties to tie down mounts to Velcro styles to pedalboard surfaces, so that we can maybe create sort of like a database, or sort of a lookup table for somebody that's motivated to take on, you know, doing their pedal boards, and they have sort of a resource that they could rely upon, that they know this is something that professionals are using, that it's going to be something that's going to last, you know, and it's not just going to be, you know, the 10-cent Amazon bulk buy tie down mounts that, you know, your first humid day of the summer is just going to lift them right off the entire pedal board, and you just have these little adhesive square wedges that are white, you know, on your pedal board, and there's no security whatsoever of the cables. So yeah, and I know that for some people in our field, they're resistant to sharing that information, and because they don't want people to have, you know, use the same stuff that they use, or whatever the reason may be. But I think we're gonna democratize the road to Tone Town. We're gonna remove any of the stop signs, and just let people have as direct path as possible. So with that said, where do you think we should start? Should we start with, you know, like the first thing that you need, like the pedalboard surfaces? It's kind of like step one.
Yeah.
Could I start by saying one thing?
Yes.
With all of this, and this may lead into the pedalboard services a little bit, but if you're listening to this currently and you're on the fence of, could I be a DIYer, or is it just so intimidating that it's just not even worth considering? If you are at all inclined to learning, you know, new skills, at one point you probably picked up the guitar or keyboard, whatever it is you play. But this is absolutely doable. And by no means, I'll be the first to say, sorry, Brian and Mason, if you guys disagree, I do not think you need to spend thousands of dollars on a setup. I do think you can learn to do this yourself. Doing it yourself is not for everybody, but I will say, I do think if you want to learn this, you absolutely can. And so today's podcast will help. Some people do not want to learn this at all. Give it to Brian, give it to Mason, let them do the setup. Great. But if you are inclined, this is
give it to Grant.
Or you can give it to Goodwood as well. But yeah, I like some
Grant.
Some people just want to learn this, and it's not that intimidating. You can do it. It will take some time. But yeah, I think the first thing is you need to decide on a pedalboard surface, and after you've done a layout. After you've done your layout, then you can find a pedalboard surface to start. And that's all I wanted to say before getting into this. Back to you guys.
Well, before you pass it back, why don't you tell us, what are some of the Goodwood approved pedalboard surface? And I know that there's certainly more than one way that gets you to a great end result. But if you had to kind of maybe give some of your top choices for pedalboard surfaces and why those might be advantageous over others.
Yep, absolutely. So like some of the most popular ones out there, there's a flatboard, which is just, for lack of a better explanation, it's a piece of plywood with metal capping on the end. The great thing about a flatboard, in my opinion, is you can prioritize your layout and quite easily get a custom flatboard made to size. So you can basically say layout is my top priority, and you can get someone to cut a flatboard to that layout, and you can get the perfect layout in air quotes. The downside to a flatboard is they're quite heavy. They're limited on other options. You can't put anything underneath. And so flatboards do have their downsides as well. So I really like, obviously the stuff that Vertex does with, it's kind of a combo flatboard with a riser. So now you're, adding 30% or more of pedalboard real estate by building up rather than by building out as you would need to on a flatboard. So I like would you call it the Travel Plus series, or what would you call your series of pedalboards?
Well, they're all, we have a Travel Light, Travel Plus, Tour Compact, and Tour Elite. There's only 4 sizes. And then there's I think there's 20 different riser permutations that you could attach depending on what you were wanting. And they're all interchangeable. Obviously you can't get a bigger riser than your pedalboard.
Unless you want to mount it to the ground.
Yeah. And some people may want that, But yeah, there's just those 4 sizes, and they're great for certain things. Like we've sort of optimized them based on the type of builds that people will see us do, and it's not for everybody.
Yeah,
but it is one good route to go if you kind of want a flatboard that's lightweight and you don't want some of the drawbacks as far as routing options are concerned, and you want to be able to utilize space underneath. Ordinarily, a flatboard couldn't accommodate that.
Yeah, and so that stuff's awesome, and I love how you've made it compatible with Pelicans, which are, again, strong and light, which weight being the big thing we're all trying to combat here. Yeah. And then we work a lot with Creation Music Company. They have an Arrow board I really like, and the Arrow is kind of an aluminum board, but you can fit power underneath, certain power supplies, I should say, underneath if they're small enough.
Yes.
And then the only other thing that I guess people really need to decide, in my opinion, is do you start with a flat surface, whether that's an aluminum board or an actual wooden board, or do you go angled? And in my mind, that's more of a preference thing than anything else. But again, with an angled board, you lose the option of custom sizing. And so Pedal Train being the biggest angled board out there, maybe not necessarily the best. Whenever we get a pedal train in, I try and convince guys to put a plywood top, paint it black. It's a little bit down and dirty, but it works. And the reasoning for that is, again, you can prioritize the layout, and you can put pedals on top of where a gap would have been if you didn't have that plywood top or some sort of custom top on it. So yeah, I've talked a little bit here. I'll pass off to either maybe Brian has some good thoughts here on surfaces as well, but that's where I'd kind of start.
But just to clarify, you don't like topless pedal trains.
Topless pedal trains. Yeah,
that's what I heard.
It's just awkward.
Okay. Yeah, for everybody.
Exactly.
Got it.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm in the same boat of whenever you're trying to don't pick your board, then try to conform everything down to that, unless you're on a crunch of space for if you're touring or fly dates or something, if you have the space, if I can share it, because I think it's a really handy tool to show. I'm not sure if I can share
go ahead and share it. If you're watching on YouTube, you'll see Brian's screen being shared.
All right, let me see if I can find it. There
Did you do some good diagrams again, Brian?
I didn't do a diagram, but I did do. Can you see this?
Yeah.
Oh, yep.
Yeah. Okay, so this is pedalplayground.com. So I literally, when I get a quote for a setup or anything, I go straight to this site. So it's free. It's amazing to use. As you can see, I can type in Vertex, and it shows all your all the boards, all the risers, the different types. It doesn't have the newest version 2 with the cutouts. They're the standard view.
We better talk to Mr. Playground.
Yeah, Travis. Yeah, I'll actually reach out to him because I do a lot of these setups, and the thing about them is they're very accurate. So you'll get like pedal trains, like websites set up that they're okay. You'll see people they're like, it's not true to size. I guarantee you, he measures every single pedal, gets every spec, and it's like, if this is what it's gonna look like, this is what it's gonna like. It's gonna fit on that board. So that's the cool thing about that is you can pick different boards, different companies, if I can do that. Or you can type in a, like
Custom
an actual flat series. Like I typically, it's like flat series. So you can throw that there. As you can see, it doesn't fit. So that's where I start is like, you can go down the pedal list and literally pick every single pedal, if it'll let me, that company could have. Some companies aren't in there if not as well known. But pick them all out, lay them all out, and then start figuring out your size.
And you can choose a pedal, obviously, that like resembles the size of something.
Exactly.
If it's like kind of like an odd or unusual brand that you're
Exactly.
that would be on there.
Yeah, he does some like he actually has like I think it's Mammoth. They have some different
I
like
see.
enclosures, which is
Yeah.
cool. Or you can actually type in a pedal dimension and like if say that size or whatever, or say 5 by 5. You can see it'll come up as square. He doesn't do like round ones, but there's other options.
No, I
so
think that's really valuable.
that's where I suggest starting is start from there, and then from there you can pick one if you need a flat board. If if you want like I prefer because then everything's right there, or you can go with an angled board like a pedal train or an elevation series by Creation. Because Creation is so close and I've known John forever, we get all of his stuff. If you can see him, I got like boards everywhere from him, literally under my feet. But flat series, elevation boards. There are the Aero series, which a lot of us build on. I see Goodwood posts a lot too on different things you can put like Ohias underneath with the extension kits, some patch bays. No, a Zuma power supply will not fit underneath an Aero. It's the most common question I get. Will it fit under? I'm like, well, it's only about what, 1.5 inches height. It's not very much.
But a Chalks will.
A Chalks will. Yes, it will. So my go-tos are flat series and Aero and Vertex boards. I don't do a lot of elevation pedal train boards because they're just really heavy. And people like, if they're like, oh, this is going to be my home board, I'll do it. Like I did some Walrus Audio, all series boards for a client, and they're at home. So like those you'll see those occasionally. But it's the new flat stuff from Creation is very lightweight. He's added this new like honeycomb material, so it's very lightweight panel, and they're very affordable too. So those are my suggestions.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, I'm in pretty much the same agreement. I think that in the odd thing that people may not know is I think all the Creation, at least the metal boards, are made by the same company that makes our boards. And also makes the Friedman boards. Yep. And so they're all, they all come from a similar place, which I think, in my opinion, makes the best, has the best quality metal work in our industry. And the way that I found them, in fact, was I always thought that Fulltone had the best quality enclosures and the best quality paint. Like if you saw an OCD from 20 years ago, they look as good as they did the day that you bought. I mean, short of somebody like, really abusing them, but normal wear and tear, they are so well made. The metal is great. The bends are great. The welding when it's needed is great. The paint quality is great. And I just looked to find who was actually the metal manufacturer of the Fulltone stuff. And that's how I found the place that makes our stuff. And they've, made our enclosures, our, pedal boards and risers and all that stuff. So,
they do custom stuff for me all the time. Like,
and they'll do custom stuff as well. For I think presumably anybody. But man, I really love our Vertex pedal boards a lot. I mean, they're not for everybody. They only come in 4 platform sizes. And the main reason why that is that we wanted them to be compatible with kind of the standard case sizes that were Pelican or Gator or SKB, all the molded style cases as opposed to ATA cases. And obviously there's going to be some people that need way bigger pedal boards or way smaller pedal boards. And I totally get that. My baseline is always professionals. And for the most part, professionals need stuff that they can either carry on, especially now that the restrictions for flying are so strict, or something that they can check, underneath a plane without having to pay increased luggage fees. So kind of the intent is that a fully built board in the case would be under 55 pounds so that it would meet whatever requirements. And obviously some guys have status and stuff like that, and they can get away with a heavier board, but the main issue is making sure that it meets all those requirements. And so our pedal boards can be traveled with, and there's not going to be any consequence to the musician financially to have to have to make alterations to their pedal board or compromise. I also really I think that the Aero pedal boards, I don't use them, but I think that if you're going to go angled, I think that that's a much better way to go than the pedal train. I think the pedal train is great for people that change stuff a lot, and you need to be able to have, a lot of stuff routed loosely so that you can make those accommodations. You're never going to get like a super neat flat board quality routing job on a pedal train. It's just too hard to do it. And I think that's why, you both have said that you will put or Grant at least said that you put a flat surface on the top of it. We're actually going to be releasing what we call pedal train skins, which are like super thin aluminum, basically like a topper to the standard pedal train sizes. And it has sort of like a flange around it in 4 places so that you can, machine screw it in, just like, it'll be even easier than mounting the power supply underneath a pedal train.
That's awesome.
Because it basically will fit, it just fits over it, and there's like a little flange lip that kind of goes around the edges of the pedal train, and then you can just machine screw those 4 sides in, and then it has a couple of different routing holes to bring cables up from the bottom, presuming you're still using the power supply underneath. But you kind of get all the benefits of a flat board, but you get to stash the power supply underneath the board, which is one of the advantages of pedal train. Although we've talked in our power supply episode that there can be drawbacks to putting the power supply underneath if it's not a switch mode supply. But I think it really depends on what your idea is of what you want to achieve. I think flat boards for having customized sizes are great because there's several different companies that can make it for you exactly the size that you want. They're going to be considerably heavier, but that's kind of like the old school OG pedal board surface. Like all the early rig builders were all using laminated plywood with Formica or Phylon, which are like kind of like countertop materials, or fiberglass, and then the bottoms are typically ABS, which is like a petroleum based kind of plastic. But I think that those are. I think that we're pretty much in alignment here about all that stuff.
I will say that there are some boards, like when you're doing the research, like there are some boards that if you're not using a switcher and you're doing pedals, or you are doing a switcher sometimes, like some of the boards like may not be as sturdy. That's a big part. So just like really do the research, or factor how many pedals you're using, big pedals, those kind of things. Cause I had a gentleman, he bought a board and he didn't put the pedals on the board and make sure they all fit. And when I started putting it together, I was like, well, the board is really flimsy when you put 90% of the pedals on and they don't all fit. He's like, oh yeah, I actually didn't think about trying to make sure they all fit before bringing them in. So that's a big part. Make sure everything's going to fit before you actually, try to do it. Because if you get partial the way through and then you have to leave off 4 overdrives or or delay or something, then that just messes with it. And
measure twice, cut once, right? It's still still is true. All these years later, it's still true.
It really is. It's well, my dad, he would say that exact thing, and I would always say it's measure twice, cut once, and cram to fit, right? And he's like, no. I'm like, well, depends. But I wanted to say that.
I think as well, we can't leave pedalboard surfaces without mentioning Schmidt Array And one I was recently looking into as well was Hellweg in Nashville.
Okay.
Schmidt-Array is like, it's like a piece of furniture. If you aren't as concerned about weight, but you want your whole board to be, it has some cool functional options, but they are a bit heavier, but come with side panels and all that. And it's beautifully made gear. And I feel like Hellweg is a bit of a bridge between considering weight, like they're a bit more lightweight, but also beautifully manufactured as well. So those are two that are, slightly different approach to what we've just talked about, but worth looking into if you're looking for something a little bit different as well.
Yeah, I think that's a fair commentary, and I think that for boards like ours, if it weren't for a Schmidt-Array type board being around, I don't think that stuff like ours would be in existence, or at least not in the form that it's in. And a lot of what we do is a response to the weight and travelability. And I think the one thing that people forget about Schmidt-Array, and I think that they are beautifully built and they are works of art, undoubtedly. I think one of the challenges is that if you are not carrying it on yourself, you need to have a case for it. And Brian and I both know, somebody who traveled with one, and the board, case that they, because it's kind of built into the case, broke, in transit, and the board becomes useless because the board in the case are intertwined. And so that's always a dangerous proposition, because if the case is damaged, now the board is compromised. So you would need a case for your case. And, I remember when I had first gone to Anderton's, Danish Pete had just had his pedal board built on a Schmidt-Array by Daniel and the Gig Rig guys. And it wasn't a big pedal board. It was maybe, I don't know, like maybe 15 by 12 or something like that. Their pedal boards tend to be a little more square. And it weighed like 50 pounds.
They're heavy.
With the top off. And I was just like, it looked great, and the board was beautifully built, but it was so heavy relative to the size that you couldn't check a board like that. You'd have to put it into a case, and then you'd increase your weight. And if you carried it on, which his would work, it was heavier than a suitcase, that was the maximum size. And so I think that's just the main concern that I would have if I were ever doing a build with them, just to really make sure that you were fully aware of the consequences.
It's not a travel board.
No.
Yep.
Yeah.
But they are amazingly well made, unquestionably.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. I agree completely.
What about if we're going to the next step? We've talked about the surface. The next part, I think, wouldn't it be like cables or cable ties, zip ties, tie down mounts, those sorts of things would kind of be the next in the organization, or maybe even Velcro. Maybe we can call adhesives and fasteners as one category. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of adhesives. Also fasteners make it high on my list. And I would say, obviously, I still remember trying to bring it back to maybe some of the guys that are new into the building their own rigs, looking up, trying to find out what are those square things called that people stick onto their boards, like anchor, plastic square thingy with tape on the back. I didn't know what to call them, so it was so hard to find them.
Let's go back to your search history when that was first happening.
Exactly. My gosh. Long since deleted. But yeah, so I call them anchors or cable mounts. I don't even know if that would work on Google, to be honest. But typically, these things are just great and they do not have to look clean. Obviously, if you're a pedal board builder, that is part of the goal. But it's just a great way to secure your cables, power, signal, MIDI, TRS, and in my mind, the main goal, other than cleaning up your board, the main goal is to make sure that none of these cables are going to get accidentally tugged on and put strain on a pedal board jack, the cable itself, whatever it is. So it's kind of preventative maintenance. And then if you can make it look clean, that's a bonus. But especially if you're using an angled board and you think maybe your power's underneath or there's cables running underneath, and you pull your board out of its case and a cable gets caught in a latch, chances are that cable is going to get ripped out, possibly damaged. And so just a couple of anchors throughout can actually save you a whole bunch of trouble. But whether or not you want to go to town on those things and put them everywhere is totally up to you. But I don't think that's necessarily a
you want to go full Omilion.
Exactly. Is it full Omo? Is that what we call it in the biz?
Probably not.
Full Omo. Emphasize the O. Yeah.
Oh my God. I just like to use a million of them, okay?
A million. Okay, good.
Yeah, so what is funny is that is like my second most asked question. What is that attaching thing called? Like, I'm like, attaching thing. I'm like, there's Velcro, there's zip tie, there's so many different things I could think of it being, and it always ends up being these little guys.
There you go.
Yeah.
So when I started, and you guys might know this, I use these ones from Home Depot.
Yep.
They're garbage. I'm just gonna be honest. I have I'm just gonna put it out there, okay? Because when you put them on, the adhesiveness of them, and I could be wrong, and I would love to know if you guys think it, is that it's just not very strong compared to like the grade that Mason was it? What do you call that grade?
Marine grade.
Marine grade, like that toughness of the anchor. And I recently actually started getting stuff from Creation again. Like I said, I get a lot of stuff from Creation. They have the 1 inch and then like a 3/4 inch size, and I found that the whole just like the tough sturdiness of them was just much better, because these, if you put these Home Depot ones on an arrow or an elevation, they're gonna fall off pretty quickly if you don't like clean down the surface really well. They just don't adhere properly. You could use a heat gun.
Is the arrow or elevation, is that the metal ones, or are those the hexagonal? Yeah. Okay.
So the arrow is a flat series bent out metal looking one. But you can put feet on to extend it, or the elevation is they're angled with the wood panel sides on it. They're both the same material. They're bent out by the same company that we know. And it's just, there's just something about that these anchors, I have a whole pack of them in my drawer, and they're like my like last resort anchors to use if it's like a flat board where it's that type of material. If I have one handy, I could show you that it actually will adhere to. I've wasted so much money on them personally, and regretted spending the money on it. And it would suck to start doing them, and then you're like, oh crap, I can't even use these. So yeah,
so buy good anchors.
Buy good anchors, unless you want them to all just fall off. I mean,
What about for zip ties and Velcro if we're going full adhesives? And also, if you have a good Brazilian waxer, this is now the time, I think, if we're in adhesives, just to
slot in our new sponsor.
Let's do it. Well, like Home Depot, there's a lot of these things you can get locally. Home Depot, they have like 1,000 zip ties. I think it's like $30 or $30 something for 1,000 of these, like 4-inch
black zip ties.
And but the big thing I see, and people will post photos of their boards, or they'll send me a photo of their board, and like I Omilioned it, which I love seeing that stuff. It's always cool to see people that tag us and they want to show off their work, which is great. A lot of people will get like the really, really, really thick zip ties, like they hold like 100 pounds, and I'm like,
mil spec.
That's what I'm saying. Like, they're really, really heavy duty, and I get that. But like, I would use that to, like zip tie like something to a flagpole or something like that. But like, if it's like, like, I don't. Oh, that's my camera. I'll keep talking. And I get these 8-inch. It's gonna be hard to see. They're really thin.
Yeah.
But they're the same thinness of the Home Depot quality. I like the longer ones because if you have a little bit of a bigger bundle of cabling. Yeah. Otherwise, you have to use 2 of the 4-inch cables together, and then it just looks weird because you got the lock part on both sides, and aesthetically, I don't like that. So I actually get these off of Amazon, and I have them on a monthly subscription, so I get like 3 packs every month.
Awesome.
And I go through so many of them. because I use a lot of that stuff. But yeah, that's what I suggest is the thinner black. I mean, if you're all for going for those colorful different zip ties, the mark out different areas, because I've seen one guy use all blue for power, all red for audio. Like, if that's what you want to do it. I just prefer these 8-inch skinny, super thin black ones.
Now, what about a Velcro? What do you like?
3M Dual Lock. I use that religiously. It's ridiculous how much I use it. Just because I like it, because I have cable right here actually. With a zip tie, with like hook and loop Velcro, you know, it's right to the surface. But 3M Dual Lock has a little bit of a gap to where you can actually like fit the cable like underneath the pedal.
Yeah.
And I've been doing a bunch of video reels lately where people will be like, how are you getting cables under the pedal with that Velcro? And I'm like, well, it's actually dual lock, and people don't realize like
you get
how
a
much
1/16 of an inch.
Yeah, it's not much, but you can't run like a ton of power cables through it. But like, you could, if you're in a pinch, you could run DC cables underneath it really nicely. Like, there's things that you can route underneath with dual lock that you can't with hook and loop. Hook and loop is great. There are some clients that like, I know that they're touring rats, so I'm gonna throw hook and loop on there because those suckers ain't gonna move ever, unless you use a wooden spatula to pry it off. Like, I mean, we've all done a wooden spatula to get something off. But I am, 3M Dual Lock. I use it all the time, and it's.
Do you
my
use
favorite.
different densities, Brian, or do you use the same density on both sides?
Currently, I only use the just one density. I know. I think you guys both use different ones. I've actually been talking to Brian Meter about getting our dual lock from Grant. So, and I think that they talked about different density. I can't quite remember, but
SJ3551 and SJ3550 I think are the best two to mate.
Okay.
But,
there's a 250 and a 400 stem, and you can mate 250 with 400 for the strongest hold.
Yeah.
Or 250 to 250. But I mean, dual lock is strong no matter what combination you use.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, and if somebody has like a revolving door pedal or something like that, you might do 250 on both sides because it'll still lock in plenty well, but it'll be a little easier to you could probably do it by hand still, but if you go 250 400, you can't do it by hand anymore.
Yeah.
Can I tell one little story about dual lock that Brian might find amusing?
Do you guys know Mr. Locke?
I don't know him personally. Been trying to get personal meetings for ages just to compliment the man. He will not take them. So maybe this is one last ditch effort right here.
Let's do it.
But there is one downside to dual lock, and this is where the story comes in. I'll try and create a good arc for you guys.
Okay.
So
storyboard it.
Dual lock has the one downside that hook and loop Velcro does not. Dual lock, if you are traveling, let's say you're flying across the country doing tour dates, and what are the airport people called that handle your luggage? The
TSA.
The TSA.
Oh,
TSA.
Yeah.
Let's go TSA. They inevitably drop your pedal board, kick it, knee it, elbow it, whatever they do it all, and they do it well. Your pedal board gets abused. Dual lock will tend to pop and release.
Oh.
And so if you need to obviously put enough on, but if it gets a hard enough hit, it will release, and you can show up on the other end, and your pedals are loose and knocking around, doing all sorts of things. For those of you listening, I was just waving my hands in the air, simulating those pedals flying all over the place. So what I did, this was probably, 4 years ago. I did a super quick video on Instagram, and I basically said, dual lock's awesome. This is the one downside. Did a hammer, and a pedal dropped off upside down on Instagram. And I said, dual lock can tend to pop.
I remember
and
this.
Literally within one day, Brian posted a video.
Me too.
And I truly believe this was
worst.
unintentional. Brian posted a video in one day, and I think it was a hammer. Takes a hammer on a pedal board.
Hammer.
Dual lock doesn't pop. And I looked at that like, Brian's not this sassy. Like he's not the guy to take a dig like this. And then we'll get your side of the story in a sec, Brian. But sure enough, I read, some of the comments on Brian's post and was like, oh, shots fired. Goodwood just posted something else, similar to this. And so I would love to hear your take if you've ever had a customer report on the popping, Brian. But also, I think we just have to clear the air, get rid of any grudges that may be still there.
First off, I just started immediately sweating crazy after hearing this story because I remember this day. I was here and like someone walks in and I had the whole board completed. Okay. And I didn't know who posted the video. I'm crying. I'm laughing so hard from this. If you're listening, tears coming down my eyes, like crying in the shower. And this guy goes, we have to scrap the whole thing. And I'm like, do what with the chicken? And he's like, we got to rip it all up. I'm like, why? And he goes, this company posted that dual lock pops, and like it was like a 32x16, like a big old thing. And I was like, the board's done. You're picking it up. He goes, yeah, well, you have to spend time to do it. I'm not paying any extra, but we have to put hook and loop on there. And I was like, why? And he told me, he didn't tell me who. I didn't know. Promise. And he's like, this company I follow on Instagram. And I was like, well, who's he? Because I don't want to tell you because I don't want you to get upset with them. Okay. So, and he's like, it pops. So I like in the most sassy possible way. And I was real irritated about it. I'm a very nice person, but I was real irritated after all that work. And I was like, watch. And I did it with the hammer. And he goes, oh, okay. I maybe it was just they use a different one. And I was just like, okay, and then I got tagged, shots fired, and I'm like, what is this? And I looked at it, and then I was like, and I think maybe it was Mike. I think Mikey was still there with you at that time. I can't quite remember.
I can't remember either.
But he like texted me something. He's like, are we good? I'm like, yeah. Why aren't we good? I don't understand. And then he's like, well, we were that company. I was like, oh my gosh. And by the point, there's so many people had seen it. And yeah, no, I had no idea it was you until I got that comment. And yeah,
I did laugh about it, but it is a funny story. And really you can go to town and use dual lock on, every square inch of the bottom of a pedal. But you are going to be pulling your hair out trying to get that off. And so I think it's trying to find a happy balance between, if you do fly a lot, finding a happy balance between if TSA does their thing, which inevitably they do, trying to find a good halfway point. And so for us, I know for a standard size pedal, let's say a 1590B, a ZVEX super hard on or something like that, RC booster, we just do 2 strips, one on the top, one on the bottom. For a timeline, you might have some examples there. Again, 2 longer strips. For volume pedals or heavier things, you can go lengthways like what Brian's showing, 2 vertical strips going the whole length of the pedal. But just have a think about that as well. The big perk about dual lock, and then I'll stop talking about dual lock after this, no more stories, I promise, is it feels awesome under your feet. It's like someone has taken 4 screws and drilled the pedals straight into the board. There's no give. It's solid. Whereas
Say
Velcro,
no to the wobble.
Exactly. Velcro on the smaller pedals, you'll feel it kind of shifting back and forth a little bit as you touch it. And so, but Velcro will never pop. You can drop it off a building. It will not disengage. And so there's 2 pros and cons. The last thing, I'm so sorry, guys. I'm talking a lot here. The last thing I will say, though, I always tell guys that ask, I want to mount something underneath my angled board. What should I use, dual lock or Velcro? And for certain situations, definitely not the whole board. Please hear that. I will say use a one side dual lock, a 250 stem, the other side loop Velcro, and that combination is going to rip the Velcro off the bottom of the board before it releases. It is such a strong hold. So for a power supply underneath a board or for something you really know you aren't going to be moving around much, that is a great thing. And if you do need to disengage that, get a thin metal ruler or your friend's, not your own credit card, and you can kind of slot it in between the two
or a library
surfaces.
card. How about
exactly,
that?
A library
card.
Yeah.
Yes.
I use the thin metal ruler all the time as a little hack even for Velcro. You can kind of just slide it between, especially on big loopers like a PBC 10. Getting a thin metal ruler and you can just disengage everything really quick. It makes a huge difference.
Oh, you got a little putty knife.
Go. Putty knife. That's awesome as well. Yeah. Some thin surface.
And are you guys hip to the upholstery crowbars?
Haven't gone there yet.
Oh man, your lives are going to be changed. So I use an upholstery crowbar to remove pedals from dual lock and or ordinary Velcro, and it's basically a crowbar, but it's made out of plastic.
Oh, brilliant.
And it's got all rounded edges. And that is the best tool, in my opinion, to remove pedals because it's very robust. It doesn't flex, but it also won't damage the paint or the metal on your pedals because it's all plastic.
Awesome.
So upholstery crowbars, you can get them at most auto stores, whatever auto store may exist where you are. I know that there's different regional auto parts stores like AutoZone or O'Reilly's Auto Parts. And
what's the one in Tonetown again?
I don't know the one in Tonetown.
Yeah, okay. we haven't gotten there yet. So when we arrive in Tonetown, we'll let
arrive, we'll know.
Yeah,
yeah. But those are really great tools to remove. And you can get like little kits on Amazon, for maybe $15 or $20, and they'll have a few different sorts of angles, sort of depending on, what it is that you want to remove. Certainly not designed for pedal boards, but really between the 16 different attachments that they give you, you'll be able to get off any pedal seamlessly without any damage to the pedal.
That's awesome.
I do want to throw one thing in there. If you put anchors down or you're trying to get Velcro, hook and loop, dual lock, anything off, one tip I suggest is using a hair dryer. You can use a hair dryer lightly on the bottom of a pedal. Helps get like the hook and loop Velcro off real easy because that stuff is a pain to take off. But it also, if you have anchors on a pedal board and they're in a way of like you wanting to put a new pedal in that spot, you can actually throw the hair. I have a heat gun, but you can also use a hair dryer just and wave over it for 30, 40 seconds, and it will help get that anchor off. You might still have some residue, but you can use your hand to roll the adhesive back off. Your fingers might hate you for a day.
Adhesive is you can actually wrap some duct tape around your fingers, sticky side out.
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
Heat gun on the glue or hair dryer on the glue, and you can just tap the glue with your taped hands, and it'll bring up that hot glue right away.
Yep.
Good way to clean a board.
And for hook and loop, you can also use the hook and loop that you've already pulled off, and I do what I call the Brazilian waxing technique, where I'll take, hook and loop that's already been removed from the pedal board, and I'll reapply it over the residue, and then rip it off. And you're not going to get a closer shave than that, I'll tell you that.
We needed a sound effect there. As soon as you ripped that glue off. I think there's a commercial opportunity there for sure.
Yeah, so if anybody has any connection with some sort of at-home Brazilian waxing kit, we'll certainly entertain a sponsorship idea.
Can I ask one last question? This may be a controversial one around adhesives, and then we can go wherever you want, Mason. But your guys' thoughts on adhesive plates that go on the bottom of pedals as a builder. I know I'm not going to mention any companies in particular. Just curious what your guys' thoughts are. Instead of dual lock, instead of Velcro, what are your thoughts on adhesive plates? Brian, come on, man.
I just put out an Instagram reel showing how to remove these.
Not how to put them on, though?
Nope.
Okay. Maybe that's enough said.
That's all I'm going to say. That's all I'm going to say. I show how to remove them. Back to you, folks.
What about me?
Do you like the adhesive plates? Okay. Mason just disappeared. What I will say, I will say they are a brilliant idea. They're very handy if you don't have a board that's super compact in terms of layout. And this is just my opinion. You guys can hate on me in the comments if you want. But as soon as you need to change your layout, then you're now kind of stuck with your pedal having to slot in a certain area, and inevitably you're going to want to find a happy medium between those two set locations, and it's going to be a pain to have to do it. So whenever we get a Prempel board in the shop, I usually tell people that, maybe consider using dual lock instead of the plates, and it'll give you more flexibility in future. Yeah. Although I do have to say, I really do think they're a brilliant idea, but they are not great for all circumstances, which is kind of like what we've been saying for most things. Like, you kind of have to find happy mediums for everything.
Hey, there's no compromise to Tone Town, though. There's no compromise.
No compromises. No compromises. I think the challenge, though, on those style boards, or really any style boards that have a lot of holes in them, using dual lock, is you don't actually get a lot of adhesion because there's not a lot of surface area.
Yeah.
And so in some cases, I can understand if you purchase that style of board, you may be sort of locked into having to go that route. I don't build boards with that surface, so I don't have a lot of experience with it. Only than removing them from the backs of pedals that are being converted into like a standard flat style pedal board. There's good ideas. The Hindenburg many thought was a great idea. Didn't turn out so well.
For someone that didn't initially want to comment, that's a strong one right there. I'm not in disagreement.
That's just talking about good ideas.
Yes, good ideas. Yep.
That's comments about good ideas, not about any particular brand.
You go.
I've had some Hindenburgs myself.
Oh, we all have. We all have.
Yeah. It was just soaring until it wasn't.
I do want to say that when I moved here to Texas from Michigan, I met a gentleman who used bike chain.
Yep.
On his boards, and I literally, those like blew my mind. I'm like bike chain, like that's just the name of it. So I searched bike chain, and it was just bicycle chains coming up, and I'm like, how the heck are you using this on a pedal board? I was so confused. He's like, no, you break them apart. I have this tool. And I will say, like, if like you don't change up your stuff and you're touring or whatever, that's another good option. But I don't suggest drilling that into a metal board.
The idea being that you have a piece of metal with two holes on it about half an inch long. One hole, the screw that holds the pedal's lid on goes through this one half of a bike chain. The other half, you can actually put a screw into your pedal board surface.
Yeah,
and so that
it just won't work though for other styles of, or not all styles of pedals, right? Like if you have let's say a Maris pedal or a full tone pedal where the screws are on the side, you'd have to bend. I do like the bike chain idea, and I had used it. And there's other there's stuff that's similar to a bike chain, which is basically almost like kind of like a figure eight style, like metal extrusion, where it's kind of looks like an 8 and has two holes. Yeah. And I used to use them sometimes on wah pedals or stuff that would have like a lot of impact, where I would do that. But wahs are really easy to make that work because they almost all have screws on the bottom, and it's a flat surface, so it's really easy to make that adjustment. But there are people that did that for a while. I remember seeing a lot of that kind of mounting technique that maybe predated the pervasiveness of dual lock.
Yep. Yes, exactly. I don't use it anymore, but I did for a while.
Not necessary anymore.
Right.
I like to keep my pedals at a cool 46.5 degree angle, so that's just me.
Grant, do you have anything that you want to add, modify, clarify about maybe some of those materials? It sounds like for the most part, you and Brian are kind of using similar stuff, but any additions to that or more validations of that?
I don't think so. I would say the main thing with anchors and zip ties and anchors and zip ties especially is don't be precious about having to cut a zip tie and rerun a channel or rip up an anchor and run it a different way. Especially if you're new to this, you will have to redo sections of your setup. And so they're so cheap. Like, chuck them down, do your setup. It's like, oh, that channel isn't where it's supposed to be. Rip it back up again and run it where it should go. and it's well worth the time to get the setup right than it is to save a few pennies, literally, on zip ties and anchors.
Yeah.
But,
I agree.
Yeah, I agree with what you guys are saying.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that the main things that I would just, validate based on what's already been said, I think marine grade adhesive tie down mounts, or whatever you want to call them, sticky back straps. I don't know. I've heard like all sorts of weird like things from people over the years. Where do you get those sticky back straps? Sticky back straps. Yeah, the marine grade, I think the real differentiator is that stuff that's made for any sort of like aquatic application like that, they have to be able to withstand kind of all weather stuff. They have to be able to withstand heat and humidity, moisture, stuff like that. So that the adhesive is just so much better. The tops of almost all of the zip tie or the tie down mounts, pardon me, are really the same for a lot of brands, especially if you're buying them on Amazon. The tops are almost identical. What differentiates the good ones from the not so good ones is the adhesive and the kind of the foam sticky back that goes to them. So 3M backed versions are really typically very good. There are knockoff 3M things that occur on Amazon, so I think people just need to be aware of that. Sometimes when it says 3M, it's not actually 3M. It's just a company that was willing to print 3M on the back of, like a decal that goes on a zip tie mount. The best company that I found as far as quality is it's called Titan Hellerman, and they're a little more expensive than the ones that you might get at a Home Depot or on Amazon. But I can guarantee you, I've never, ever, ever had one come off unless it was like physically pulled apart. Yeah. Like where the only time I've seen them come off or they've come off, the white kind of foamy adhesive is on both sides. So it like ripped in the middle. It wasn't like it detached from the board or that the plastic detached from the foam. So those are really, really great quality. And they come in the standard kind of like 3/4 inch or, inch plus sizes. Those are great. For tie down mounts, I'm in total agreement, for zip ties, I'm in total agreement with Brian. I think the 4-inch zip ties, the thinner ones are the ways to go. If you need a larger cable loom, then getting, an 8-inch one is great. So you have a little bit more leverage when you're kind of strapping down a big loom of cable. As far as Velcro is concerned, I never even use hook and loop really for anything. I used dual lock for a really long time, and I did what Grant does where I would offset 2 different densities. And basically the 2 different densities or the model numbers are SJ3550. That's a 250 loop, and it kind of is in an S pattern. And then SJ3551 is in a really straight, dense pattern. And the combination of those 2 together really creates the most lock that you can possibly get. And some people have said, well, why don't you just use SJ3551 on both sides? Well, because they're both running the same direction, they actually don't have as much rigidity, surprisingly, to me, as the 250. However, we don't use dual lock anymore, although I have no objection to using it. We partnered with Power Grip to create sort of like a signature version of a dual lock style or dual lock adjacent style Velcro. And it's really the only principal difference is I think our adhesive is a little bit better as far as modification. If you end up taking off dual lock, sometimes it can be a little bit difficult to clean that up, especially if you get the black dual lock that has the white foam adhesive on the back. So it cleans up a little bit better. And you don't need to use 2 different densities to get the same amount of staying power that you would get with the offset, where you'd buy SJ3551 and SJ3550. So in principle, it's very similar. It just has that benefit. And price-wise, it's about the same. So there's not really any cost savings for going with the Power Grip version that we use. But I just like that I only have to have like one part number, and I can use the same thing for everything. And it works really great. So I would say as far as tie-down mounts, zip ties, dual lock, Velcro, I think we're all pretty much there.
Yeah.
And I think as well, correct me if I'm wrong, Mason, but if people just want to get this stuff, I know Creation sells some of it. A lot of it's on your website. We have a parts store where you can buy all this stuff as well. So, I mean, it is available to easily get.
Yeah, or Amazon, or there's a place called like iTape Store that sells both 3M dual lock, and has all those different densities and different colors if you want clear versus black. There's options for that. One thing I will just say as an aside is that when you apply dual lock or fill in the blank adhesive, don't go all the way to the edge of your pedal, because you will always see those seams of the Velcro underneath the board. And so usually and it's not just me, I can definitely see that all of us do it here, where we kind of set in the alignment of the dual lock or whatever Velcro it is that we're using in by maybe a eighth inch or a 16th of an inch from the edge of the pedal. And I typically don't cover the screws so that we have access to the bottom of it. Correct. If you need it. I usually kind of offset it slightly from the screws and slightly from the edge of the pedal, so that it doesn't show when the Velcro is invisible once the pedal's down. And if I ever need to remove the bottom of the pedal for whatever reason, that I have full access to the screws that hold together the enclosure.
And also for an angled board that often has holes in it, don't put the dual lock on your pedal before you know if it's going to go over top of a hole. Yeah. That's also speaking of Hindenburg moments, I've done layouts like I'll just pre-do all the dual lock and I'll just pop it down, and then needless to say, it's trying to stick to air. And dual lock, as great as it is, doesn't do well sticking to air. Yeah,
it's not guaranteed.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. Now, I think that the final part of sort of the DIY components, as far as materials are concerned, it really has to come down to cables and plugs. And maybe we can sort of wrap this around not only like power cables and plugs, but audio, TRS, MIDI, cables and plugs as well, and kind of tie all that up and finish the conversation today on that.
Yeah.
Who wants to kick us off?
I'll go for it, and I'll try not to talk too long. So I will say the first thing that comes up with cable, and I know you guys will have more to add to this, but to keep it really simple at the top, people love to focus on capacitance, and the best cable out there is the one with the lowest capacitance. And I know this isn't a podcast on that, but I think the main thing to know is that every cable has a sound, and I'll tell guys, especially for going pedal to pedal on your pedal board, if you're used to a certain sound, let's say George L's is quite bright, and you move to something like Mogami 2319, which is kind of one of the industry standards, you're going to notice a big difference. It's going to sound like you turned a pedal on or off on your board. Mogami is a little bit darker. And so I would say go into a new pedal board setup if you're going to use a new type of cable, knowing that it will change the sound of your board. The bigger the board, the more drastic the sound. So I mean, I don't know what people are using currently as they're listening to this, but we basically exclusively use Mogami 2319, and we also offer like an Evidence Audio monorail, which is a solid core cable. But really it does come down to a lot of preference with the sound that you're kind of after. And I know even Mason, you did a video, this is a while back, might have been last year now, where you got a bunch of artists together, blind tested them on a bunch of different cable types. And I was really curious to see the outcome, and I was surprised to see that it wasn't something like necessarily, I don't even think it was 2319 or monorail that was the winner that everyone kind of preferred. Yeah. It was something, and you'll have to tell me what it was, but in a blind test there was another type of cable that they all kind of gravitated towards, but I know it was kind of more of a standard hardworking type cable.
It was the Mogami 2314, which is basically just the slightly smaller diameter version of the 2319. So it was real similar cable, just a little smaller diameter. But the other thing on that video that I thought was the most interesting finding of all of it, because first what we did is just tested all the cables, just like kind of like what would be a normal, maybe serial pedal board length. So I think that they were all maybe like 30 or 50 feet. I can't remember the length that we chose, but all of them were the same, soldered with the same cable. They're the same plugs, same length of cable throughout. And then we moved a buffer in front of them, which would be more typical of what you would see on a pedal board.
Yeah.
And once the buffer was involved, the differences between cable A and cable B and cable C, et cetera, became much more nullified. In other words, they didn't have the same drastic changes sonically that occurred when you were using them with just driving them with the passive guitar pickups. Once the buffer was involved, those differences really narrowed considerably. So maybe there was a 20% difference between cables before the buffer. Once the buffer was involved, they all were within a few percentage points of each other in terms of the difference. So I think that really what it was indicative of is if you're using high quality buffers, you can probably get away with a variety of different cable types because the pedal board environment is so low impedance comparatively to what a guitar pickup can produce, in terms of driving cable capacitance, that it kind of just changes the game to a degree. So where George L might have a really perceivable sound difference coming from the guitar going into the pedal board, once it's on the pedal board, there's probably going to be a lot less difference sound-wise using George L versus Evidence versus Lava versus Mogami versus Belden, et cetera.
Yeah. Which it's always interesting to hear from my side of the fence where people fight this out over and over again.
Yeah.
And really at the end of the day, I don't think there's as much of a difference as people like to think there is. And if they were blind tested like these professionals were, it can be really hard to tell the difference. So, one question that always comes up for us is it worth upgrading to monorail, which is a more expensive solid core cable from 2319? I tell people it is not, if you haven't personally experienced it already, I wouldn't necessarily spend the money on it unless you already know going in, this is, insert the cable name, this is the cable I prefer. I probably would just stick with a 2314 or 2319 and just call it a day.
Yeah. So I mainly use the 2319, 2319 cabling for short patch cables. Sometimes, depending on the switcher system, if it's like a PBC 10, depending, I might do like loops 1 through 6 might be with the 2319. But I used 2314 for a while, but I started realizing I could get double I have literally the cable sitting like right next to me. That's why I'm looking down.
2528 or
25. I think it's 2528. I can't quite remember the number.
It's basically the same thing as 2319, except it's got a seam in the middle of it for an insert cable or Y cable. Yeah.
So it's 25. So the cool thing about it is because I tell people like ends up being like double the cable, but it also has, and it's hard to tell. And if you're listening on the podcast, envision two thinner cables, but one has a white line on it, like a white strip down the side of it. And why I like that is because when you're doing, I go through the cables, if you're making splitter cables like a TRS on one end to dual TS on the other side, you tip, like for me, I'll solder, the tip will be the white lined side, and then the ring will be the solid black
opposite.
side. You're the opposite. Okay.
I'm the opposite.
Okay.
I have no reason. Whatsoever, but that's interesting to hear.
Yeah.
That's good to
I don't know why. It's just, I've always done it with the 2328 on square plugs. They're pretty tight already. Like you don't really need like the heat shrink because they clamp down, because I use the SP400 plugs. I rarely use the SP500 plugs. I did one on this side because I labeled the ring side with heat shrink, but then like you'll get stuff like on, like I mainly use the Creation plugs recently because I've had a shortage of getting this square plugs, but like you can see 2528 fits on a TRS pancake plug and a TRS straight plug, but you can't get two 2319s in a pancake or a straight plug. I have tried, and it's just not possible. You're gonna rip the cable off.
Can you get 2528 into a TRS square plug?
Yeah.
Yes, you can. Yeah, it's very, very
I was going to
tight.
ask if you guys have any special techniques, because I can do it, but man, it kills me.
Yeah, no, I've actually had one guy, he's like, I can't, I don't know how you did it. Like, it was like phone calls of me trying to explain it to him. And I'll tell people, it's all about how you lay the cable in the channel, really comes down to it. Like, they have to be on top of each other. They can't be on the side. They have to be, like, perfectly. And there's an art to soldering a TRS plug. We all know a TRS and a MIDI cable, because there's just so many pins. But with the SP 500s, I don't have the problem with the mini cakes, because there's a little bit more wiggle room inside, which is nice. But the SP 550s, I guess it's 550S, when I just barely tighten one side, and then I have a pair of coated clamps that I'll clamp down on the plug, and then I'll just tighten and get them, and then I'll go side by side until I get it locked in.
Okay, about the same method then.
It is a pain though.
Yeah, it's frustrating.
That's why I've been using the mini cakes with Creation, because they're the same identical size. The inside has a little bit more room inside. If it's a normal patch cable, I have to use heat shrink, because there's too much wiggle room inside. It kind of reminds me of like the Switchcraft. I can't remember. Yeah, the 228s. Those are like what I originally started with. Those had a lot of wiggle room, and you had to add, even on 2319, which, because I'm a dad, because we're like, 2319 Instagram, not Instagram, Monsters Inc. The sock. That's how I call it, the sock cable half the time. We had 2319. So like using that cable with like a Creation plug, I have to put heat shrink. So yeah, it comes down to 2528, 2319, and then I have like a standard Mogami mic cable I use. I just can't remember.
2552 probably. Hey.
Yeah, 2552 is kind of standard. Yeah.
For everyone listening, it's just mumbo jumbo numbers, and sorry. So there's XLR cable, there's patch cable, and then I call it like insert cable, the two running beside each other that you can do an insert cable with. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. All those numbers, you call
so many.
877 Jenny.
675-309.
Yeah, but I think as far as what Brian said, I think it's pretty standard. Like 2319, I think is really great, easy to use, and I think that the consideration is that people forget about in when it comes to cables is that you don't need to have the same type of cable that would exist outside of the pedal board on the pedal board. So a lot of people, especially in the past, would say, well, why don't I just use Neutrik, like really thick, robust plugs everywhere on the pedal board, Mogami 2524, which is the really thick, like the thickest instrument cable that they make as a standard, and just use that everywhere on the board. Isn't that better? And the answer to that is no. And in the confines of Tone Town, right, the speed limit on the pedal board is 15 miles an hour. We don't need the robust plugs of a Neutrik plug or a thick cable like a 2524, because you can't route it very efficiently without putting a lot of stress on the plugs or the jacks of the pedals themselves, and you just don't have the room to be able to do it. And so any of the benefits that would be attributed to a Neutrik plug and a Mogami 2524 thick cable are completely lost and irrelevant on the context of the board. You need flexibility. You need something that's easy to route, something that is a smaller diameter, so that when you're doing these larger cable looms, you're able to fit everything appropriately on the pedal board. So by all means, use 2524 and Neutrik plugs for what's coming into the pedal board and what's leaving the pedal board. But on the pedal board, as we talked about before, the difference between cables is really nullified if you're using high-quality buffers, as we've talked about in other episodes. So long as those are in place, the difference between a Georgelle, a Monorail, a 2319, a 2314, those are all going to be within a very small margin difference. And I would go for the cable that's going to be the easiest to work with, is the most flexible, and is going to be reliable in this context. And I think that the cables that we mentioned are absolutely it. And I think that if you want to get into plugs, I pretty much only use square plugs exclusively. The SP400s is typically what I'll use, or the SP550S if I need stereo. And there's a new one that's now a straight version of that same stereo plug. I forget the model number. Do you know what it is, Brian?
I don't, because I've actually never used it. I was never a fan of the straight square plugs, just because when they originally released it, you had to do the little screws on the side, and I never could get like a solid connection. Plus, they didn't have a TRS version, so I haven't used it. But I know the new version it has like a cap on the inside that's like a better like restraint inside, and it actually just screws on, and that's it. There's no screws, so I don't actually know.
And it's thicker than the original SP.
I think there's a 6 series now. They kind of made a bigger diameter series. Yeah.
So anyway, those are great. I use all those. The straight ones I like. I just think you need to be you have to end up with pretty short leads in order to get the set screw to really be effective as far as strain relief is concerned on those.
Exactly.
For TRS, I do use the 2552. I also use 2552 on MIDI because you don't need 4 conductors and a shield for MIDI for guitar stuff. You just need a shield and then 2 center conductors for the 3 middle pins on a 5-pin DIN MIDI protocol. And so I'll use typically those switchcraft clocking jacks, and clocking just means that you can rotate the angle of the plug, like you would positions of the clock. Yeah, if you're looking on YouTube, you can see Brian holding one up right now.
Sorry, I can't focus.
So I'll use those for MIDI, or I'll use the Neutrik or Rian straight versions of the same style 5-pin DIN MIDI protocol plug. And TRS again, I'll use the switchcraft, or not the switchcraft. I'll use the square plugs, and I use square plugs for all the patch cables and all that stuff, whether it's the SP400s, which are the pancake, or the SPS4, which is the straight.
Yeah.
And one other thing as well, just to illustrate the giant Neutrik plugs, on a pedal board and why you don't need them. I still remember when we first started doing setups, we were using, I think it's called a Switchcraft 318, the short body straights.
Yeah, 380s.
Oh, yeah. 380s, yeah.
Those don't even have strain relief. Like you literally, the only thing holding the cable in place is solder. And that sounds like a little bit of that's a risky move. But I will say we never once had an issue with them. And on an instrument cable, it's not going to work. But on a pedal board where you're not pulling the plug, in and out all day long, you really don't need that much on your plugs as far as strain relief goes. Obviously, most have it. But just to illustrate the point that you really don't need to go overboard as far as strain relief and robustness on a giant plug. You want a good quality, small form factor plug to prioritize a layout and space on your board, and you can kind of move forward from there. So we also use square plugs. I sometimes find them a little bit harder to solder. I don't know if it's sometimes batch related or what, but I do like the size. And then we use a run of our own Goodwood plugs as well, and basically very similar to what you guys have mentioned as well. And it all does a great job. Different plugs for different applications, and you're kind of set to go.
Yeah. Well, I think we covered a lot of stuff today. We talked about adhesives. We talked about Velcros. We talked about tie mounts. We talked about zip ties. We talked about all the things that you would need as far as pedal board bases are concerned, the surfaces with which you might want to mount to, and the various cable types. Are there any final thoughts that we want to bestow upon our listeners before we complete for today?
Brian, words of wisdom? Come on, man. I know you got
I would say if you're going to do this DIY, one thing we didn't talk about are cable testers. Is to get a cable tester. People I can solder the tip and ground, no problem. I can do the same thing, but I rely on that cable tester, which minus, I've went through multiples of these, but it's the Behringer CT100. I'm not going to autofocus and mess up my camera, but I use it because it tells me when I made a TS cable, a TRS cable, an 1/8 inch cable, a MIDI cable, a right angle, or XLR cable. And I rely heavily on this because it will tell me if the cable is dead, if it's grounding out. So make sure you invest in a cable tester if you're going to build these cables, and take your time. Don't, as I say, don't rush. It's 15-mile speed limit. So
yeah.
Love it.
That's me.
Cable testers are great. I also really rely on a multimeter as well. If you can get both.
Same.
Yeah.
Multimeters are great, especially for some super short cables that might not work on certain cable testers. Then you can just use the multimeter.
Yeah. Also, the multimeter will tell you about whether you have any resistance on the cable, and sometimes the cable tester won't tell you the quality of the connection. It'll just see if there's continuity, and sometimes you can have still a bad quality connection, even if it shows that it has continuity.
Correct.
Which we talked about in previous episodes, I think, with the dielectric, and it'll show up as a good cable, but in reality, it's not. So that's another episode. But yeah, I would say, honestly, this stuff, if you are going to DIY this for the second time, if you're early in this kind of process of making your own cables, doing your own setup, you are not going to get it perfect the first, second, or probably even 10th time. It takes a lot of time to really get it to where you're going to be really happy with it. But as is the road to Tone Town, as we say, it's windy. It's a little bit long, but it's well worth the journey. And so just don't get frustrated. Don't give up. We're all here to answer questions. Post questions even in the YouTube comments here. And I'm pretty sure they all go answered. I know I check them periodically and make sure there's nothing missed. And I know, Mason, you guys do a great job on that as well as Brian. So just put your questions up, and we're all here to help. And we know what it's like to start out and have no clue. I still feel like that a lot of days. And so let's all help each other out and get better pedal boards and better tone because of it. So put your questions in the comments on the YouTube channel.
Yeah. I agree with all that's been said. And again, there's no shortcuts to Tone Town. And also I want to mention that I think all of us have some version of soldering and or cable making tutorials that are available, whether that's through Instagram, whether that's on YouTube. So use that as a resource when you're making your MIDI cables or your instrument cables or your patch cables. It's something to rely on. And if you're listening to this only and you're not watching it on YouTube, you'll have considerably less ability to be able to ask questions to us. But we do have in our show notes all of our respective emails, which you can reach out to if you don't want to go and find us on YouTube and put a comment in this particular episode's comment section. Again, we'd be happy to answer that for you. And if you enjoyed this conversation and the conversations we've been having throughout the last few months now, we would really appreciate a review, whether that's on iTunes podcast or whether that's on Spotify or wherever you can leave a review for the podcast. We would appreciate it. It goes a long way in helping other people like you find information like this when they're searching through their podcast apps. So the algorithm can find them, to the degree that Al Gore is still involved in the algorithm. Well, we don't know.
Algorithm, love it. Haven't heard that one before.
Yeah. And I always thought, Tipper Gore, his wife, was always the better dancer, but he's still got the algorithm all these years later. But in any case, thank you all for listening, guys. It was a pleasure as always to talk gear and materials with you, and hopefully for those DIYers out there, they have a little bit more information than they started the episode with. Totally. So until next time, we will see you guys.
See you next week.
See ya.